Thank you very much. Please join me here. We have a few minutes for a Q&A. This session was on reaching out for Mr. Baswan. If there are any questions, we would take them at this point from the floor. We have some roving mics around. Yes, right there at the back.
Just a clarification question. You had on your first slide rent-seeking bureaucracy at the cutting edge. What does that mean?
Well, basically, it's a euphemism for corrupt bureaucrats across the counter. Yes, it's a term that economists use, and it's one of the better euphemisms.
Thank you. Sure.
Very low rate of internet penetration in India.
Yes.
What is the growth rate? What are the impediments to growth so that there can be increased transparency to help propel government reform?
Two or three major obstacles, as it were. One, of course, is broadband. And we had Wi-Fi. Wi-Fi wasn't really effective. And as far as broadband is concerned, we have a state-owned monopoly looking after telephones, and they maintain the telephone lines. So you've got copper lines going around the country, which have to be replaced by OFCs. And therefore, the spread of broadband is much slower than it should be. As far as the other obstacles are concerned, well, you have entrenched interests who wouldn't like access to what they're doing. Even our right to information bill hasn't really taken off fully. It's made a difference. But I would say that a lot of the mindsets of the officials and to some extent of the politicians has slowed down awareness. In fact, education, and I was my country's education secretary, it had suffered a lot because the social sector does not have a political constituency. These are long gestation, low visibility investments. They don't get you votes. So therefore, you have the crowding out of education and health, which means that the public awareness is much lower. And then you've got people trying to operate in a closed system, as it were. So these are the two main obstacles. Yeah.
Right here.
Yes, sorry.
A lot is said about inequity, inequality
Yes.
in India. And I wonder what your view is about the way in which the information revolution, as you call it, is affecting that equity or inequity in India. Is it making the gap bigger, or is it making it smaller?
Yes. I would say that it's making it smaller at one level because more and more people are using it. Having said that, I'd say that the first people who have access to better technology are the haves in the small towns and the haves in the villages. And very often these are the elements who exploit the others. So they've been empowered first, and the others would follow. Now there is a trickle down in all of this, and the gap is certainly increasing in certain ways, that if you take the gap between the rich and the poor, you find that the poor are getting there, but they're getting there ever so slowly. So the gap is increasing. Our Gini coefficient is more favorable than China's is. So we don't quite have the same inequity that you have in a communist country. And yet, ours is a very hierarchical society, and certainly, there are people who like to perpetuate these inequities. The government, I believe, are sincere in trying to reduce these inequities. You have huge regional imbalances in the country and sectoral imbalances. These aren't a bad thing because we believe that imbalances can often trigger growth.
Yes, we have the gentleman right there.
Thank you. You say that mobile technology is much more efficient than the internet in India.
Yes.
I can understand that because of the access is more rapid. Would that mean that the Indian government is putting more development finance into mobile technology to give access to education or health or whatever, or agriculture, than the internet? Is this something which you are seeing? I see that for instance, for my development agency, which is the French development agency, we're putting all our money into the internet and not in the mobile. So maybe we should be thinking of doing something else. So can you please give us your position in India, what is happening?
Reform in our country I believe is taking place more by accident than by design. And the government had learned to take a back seat. In fact, information technology grew because there was no government department. It grew almost unnoticed, as it were. If there was a government department, the WAG say the reform wouldn't have taken place. So you've had creeping reform. You've had the mobile telephony opened up because there was corruption. And this is good corruption. It facilitates reform. So to that extent, as opposed to the negative kind of corruption. So what happened over here was that the reform took place because there was an enabling environment, because there was a pot of gold at the end of the rainbow. And since then, the mobile telephony has gone beyond the reach of the government. Now the government, even now, there are attempts to virtually auction, Gen 4 and WiMAX. And so therefore, they haven't given up. But what will happen is that events will overtake us.
Thank you. I had forgotten to indicate that when we ask for the floor, that you kindly also say your name and where you're coming from so that we all know who is speaking. It escaped my mind. We have time for one last question or comment from the floor, if there is. Right there, ma'am, at the back, yes.
Hi, my name is Patty Michelle, and I work with the Millennium Villages project at the Earth Institute at Columbia University. And you had mentioned earlier that it's the demands from the consumers that's going to help transform a lot of this. If you could just reflect a little bit on what the demands are and where you see those trends going and how that is going to have an impact on change.
Sure. The demand basically is for better services and better communication. It travels by word of mouth. When someone in a village or in a small town or a larger city knows that his neighbors have cellular phones, it becomes a matter of prestige to own one. And therefore you do have people demanding access. And then of course you have the falling price of mobile telephones because there's competition. And therefore what's happened is they've been empowered, they have more choices. And when they see the demonstration effect, there are a fair amount of advertising going on. And one of our most effective advertisements shows, for example, the people in a tea shop in a small town. And out there, the well-heeled customers, a mobile phone rings. So the well-heeled customers, they feel in their pocket. Then the shop owner goes through his pockets, it's not his phone either. And the chap with tattered clothes who's serving tea, he's the guy with the mobile phone. So he picks it up and talks. So the idea is that anyone can own this, it helps.
Thank you. Thank you very, very much for a brilliant presentation. Thank you so much.